So I'm going to talk today about my experiences at Hacker School. And I will explain Hacker School in a second. I was briefly introduced, but to reiterate, I'm a director for the Python Software Foundation and an organizer for this giant user group in Boston, and I run all of these outreach workshops. And I say all of that mostly to emphasize that I spend a lot of time thinking about community, and specifically thinking about community development in the Python community. For the last couple of weeks, I've been sort of meditating on a question. And this question is, what are the qualities of a great hacker? And I have to say that the word hacker I have some reservations about, because it's a loaded word for a lot of people and can be a little bit intimidating. But hacker in the context of not like a rock star ninja hacker, but I mean the people that you know who you can give any problem and they can solve it. You know, you can dump them into a foreign code base with some horrible performance bug, and they know how to systematically narrow down the issue and solve it elegantly. And they do that across the board consistently because they've developed a skill set that enables them to do this. So when I think about the qualities of a great hacker, I think of a couple. This is not a complete list, but I think a couple of things. One of them is this discipline about systematically debugging problems. They're able to break down large problems into parts that can be handled independently, and they can architect solutions to complicated problems. They're comfortable learning new material on the fly as necessary while solving problems, while implementing solutions. They're good communicators. They've probably written a lot of code. They've developed an intuition, having seen all of these patterns, for how to approach problems. So these are the things that I think about when I think about a great hacker. And I was thinking about these things because I had the great pleasure and privilege of acting as a resident at a program called Hacker School in Brooklyn and New York last month. So Hacker School is a 3-month program. What you do is you all get together, a bunch of people get together, and full-time for 3 months, they commit themselves to honing their programming craft. So if you think about that, I mean, that sounds amazing, right? You don't have a job. Many people quit their jobs to go do this. And for 3 months, they are doing nothing all day but becoming better hackers. And so I had an opportunity to hang out with these folks and talk to a lot of them and listen to a lot of them and pair program with a lot of them. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what beginners struggle with. I learned a lot about what intermediate programmers struggle with. I learned a lot from great experienced hackers who were spending time at Hacker School. One thing that I observed was that, particularly for the newer programmers, while they were working on interesting projects, it didn't necessarily seem like those projects had been chosen with a ton of very specific thought about honing their programming skills. They were working on interesting things. They were taking some Coursera classes. They were learning about machine learning, stuff like that. But when I would ask them, what do you want to get out of Hacker School? A lot of them didn't necessarily have a super coherent answer for that. And so I talked to the instructors about this, and we decided that maybe it was worth spending some time on an experiment. And in that experiment, what we would do is we would all circle up around whiteboards, and we would answer 2 questions. One question was, what are your weaknesses as a programmer, as a hacker? These things that we talked about earlier, debugging and deconstructing problems and things like that. Where do you see your weaknesses as a hacker so that you could work on them here at Hacker School? And the second question we asked was, what are your fears as a programmer? What are things that intimidate you as a programmer, as someone who programs as part of a broader community? And this was a really, really illuminating discussion. This is probably hard to see, but so here's, a photo of whiteboard number 1. Here's a photo of another whiteboard. And to pull out some specific examples, for the skill set question, we got a lot of the stuff that we talked about. I want to get better at debugging. I don't really know how computers work, and that bothers me. It feels like I am not anchored properly for solving some kinds of problems. A lot of people had never made something new from scratch that other people had used afterwards before. And that was a really big, intimidating milestone to come upon. But this stuff is really illuminating for me as someone who cares about community, because it's useful for me to know that a lot of people worry about these things as skills. And these are not things that you develop in school necessarily, and not even on the job necessarily explicitly. A lot of this stuff happens from years and years of practice, unless you're being focused about it. And that was exactly the point of Hacker School, right? We're here for 3 months to work together to hone these skills. So it's a good thing that we finally identified a bunch of them so that we can focus on working on them together. So these were some answers to the skill set question. Here was on the other board. I really like this one concept, this concept of code radius. One of the Hacker School staffers, this is a phrase that he uses about himself. He said, when we were talking in this circle, I feel like I'm a great programmer up to 1,000 lines of code. And then when my programs get bigger than that, when their code radius expands beyond 1,000 lines, I feel like my ability to write code efficiently, to keep it all in my head, to structure the code elegantly, really breaks down. And that is a thing that, having verbalized this all to you guys, I want to work on that while I'm here at Hacker School. I thought that was a really interesting observation. Even more interesting were the answers to the fear question. Here are a couple of common ones. This is the one that resonates with me the most. I know a lot of people who worry about feeling like they're not smart enough as programmers. Okay, why don't you raise your hand if you sometimes feel you're not smart enough as a programmer? Is that practically everybody, right? Okay. So as a beginner, a lot of people felt like they were the only one. And then this would last forever. Like, I have been programming for 6 months, and I think I'm not smart enough, and I don't know what I'm doing here anymore, and that's really stressing me out. And being able to hear this, we can do something about this now at Hacker School, because once they know that they're not alone, and this is a specific feeling they can work on, it'll get better. And this is also not only expressed by beginners. You know, there were super experienced folks at Hacker School. I talked to a lot of programmer friends of mine preparing for this talk, one of whom, Ned, is exactly twice my age. You can try to guess how old that makes him based on what I look like. But Ned is twice my age, and he's been programming for longer than I've been alive, and he still feels like this sometimes. But it's really important to identify this stuff so that you can tackle it, so that you can mentally tackle it, and so that we as a community can be conscientious of this with all of the new people, and even the experienced people who are joining our ranks as Python programmers. Okay, well, I keep saying Python community, and that means a lot of things. I think it's worth spending just a couple of minutes enumerating some of the sort of the major components. Okay, so one big part of Python is sort of Python core development. Does anyone have a guess how many core committers there are? 30? Yeah, maybe. Does anyone have, okay, so 30, some 2 digits. Anyone want to guess how many users have registered on the Python bug tracker? 10,000? Okay, yeah. That's a lot of people. Okay, so there are almost 150 Python core committers. This is a big project that is used by a lot of other really big projects. I know that not everyone has acted on their user registration, but 12,000 people expressing an interest in contributing to Python, that is a huge number of developers. And then there's the broader Python in open source community. In case you're wondering, Python is the 3rd most popular language on GitHub. Anyone want to guess how many packages are on PyPI? 3,000? Oh, Price is Right stuff? Oh, a lot. The answer is a lot. 25. So that means, think about how many people it takes to make that happen. This is a huge community. There are over 200 user groups listed on python.org on our wiki. And then if you look at meetup.com on their page about projects that list some relationship to Python, we're talking over 100,000 people involved with Python internationally. with user groups. There are a ton of regional conferences. I mean, we're here at PyCon Canada. This is an incomplete list. I mean, we're talking the PyCons, the DjangoCons, all of the scientific computing conferences. This is an amazing amount of regional effort around Python community. And then there's this new thing that's been happening the last couple of years. Well, it's sort of new and it sort of isn't, but we're seeing a new kind of volume the last couple of years. So there are a bunch of new, really popular, massive online learning initiatives. Has anyone taken, so raise your hand if you've taken a Coursera class. Yeah, anyone, how about Udacity? A couple, smaller number. edX, MIT and Harvard's, they're kind of losing that game, I know. Anyway, so Coursera, at least I've personally taken a ton of Coursera classes. As it happens, because Python is such a great learning language, all three of these programs have decided to use Python as their intro to programming language. Between these classes, over 300,000 people have had their first taste of programming in Python in the last year and a half. Like, that is an astonishing number of people. And not all of them stick with it, but this is the introduction that they're getting. This is the taste that they're getting. And these are mostly, this is informal learning. This is not in a classroom setting. A lot of these people don't have formal CS educations. And it's worth mentioning that at Hacker School in Brooklyn, 75% of those folks had no formal CS training as well. So these were folks who never went to college or majored in something else, definitely had never had a job in programming, and were attending this program to bolster their skill set, mostly in the hopes of making a career change. So a lot of informal learning as well. And so we have all of these people, a ton of beginners, but a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds interacting in a lot of different ways in the Python community. It's worth keeping in mind the skill set concerns and the fears that people have. So that's our community. I want to offer up two primitives for us as we talk about ways that we can make ourselves better, increase our skill sets as programmers, and support other learners in our communities. So two primitives. One is the Python Grants Program. Because I think, and I want to make sure that everybody leaves here knowing that this is an opportunity at your disposal. So if you have a great idea for a way to do something useful in your Python community, your local community, the Python Software Foundation will give you money to do it. This happens a lot for Intro to Python workshops. People here are from all over the place. I don't know if you have a local user group, if you have a local Python community. If you wish there were one, if you wish there were Intro to Python workshops where you live, the Python Software Foundation can help make that happen. We'll pay your meetup.com fees. We'll help connect you with local mentors. We'll pay for that pizza for your intro workshop. And we also sponsor a lot of conferences like this one through the grants program. So if you have an idea in your head for something that you would like to do, maybe to increase your skill set, maybe a thing that you want to work on is communication, is teaching, or if you want to make an Intro to Python workshop happen in your community, please write up a proposal. We would love to help you out. And the second primitive here is, relatedly, there's a sprints program. So if you've ever wanted to get together to hack on Django or Python Core or whatever it is that you want to work on, and you want to have dinner to boot while you're doing it, we want to help you do that. We want to encourage people to be sprinting together in person on Python projects. So the next time you're thinking about doing that with your friends, we can help you out. OK. So what scares us about programming? How can we do something about this? OK. So drilling in on our various community opportunities, raise your hand if you would like to contribute to Python. You would like to contribute to Python, this language that we love. Okay, I certainly would like to contribute to Python. Raise your hand if you have contributed to Python. Okay. So for all of the people who raised their hands the first time, but not the second time, I am interested in knowing why you haven't contributed yet. What is stopping you? This is a serious question, because I think for people there are complex personal answers to this, none the least of which is that it's very intimidating to contribute to an open source software project. Given how many of you raised your hands the first time, I want you all to know that there's a thing that exists, the Python Core Mentorship Program, that is expressly designed to facilitate new contributors to Python. This is a mailing list full of friendly folks, friendly committers to the software, who are there to answer any and all questions that you have. So if you raised your hand the first time, I would encourage you to A, think about why you haven't contributed yet. Is it because it's intimidating? Is it because you feel like you don't have the sort of the tools that you need, the open source development tools that you need? Well, think about what the answer to that question is. Check out the Python Core Mentorship list, and I would encourage you, particularly while you're here at PyCon Canada, surrounded by all of these friendly folks who are here to support you, that maybe this weekend is the weekend to take the plunge. Maybe get a group together and make it happen. And for folks who are experienced contributors, let's turn this around on you. You saw the hands. What can we do as open source project maintainers to make this easier? Python has bite-sized bugs. It has documentation for new contributors. What is next? What is effective for getting new people involved? I have a suspicion that local sprints, in-person mentorship is probably helpful for a lot of people, which sounds to me like a call to action for you all to go back to your local user groups, get some sprint money, and organize a Python core development sprint. That's an idea to take home. And this stuff extends to sort of the broader Python and open source community. The same questions as before, but one thing to really keep in mind is that a lot of the overhead, a lot of the barrier to entry for open source contribution is not necessarily about the project. Like what is stopping you from contributing to Python? It may not be Python. I think most of us here know Python. A lot of this is this mental overhead of, other people are going to read my code. I need to know these tools. I need to learn a revision control system and how the bug tracker works and all of that stuff. And that can be very scary. So how can we make that better? Well, here's another resource that you might be interested in if you've always wanted to contribute to an open source project but haven't. There's a nonprofit called OpenHatch, which has online training missions for practicing the tools of open source development. You can do things like learn about using diff and patch to create a patch. You can practice using Git. They're all very friendly people. You can practice talking to them on IRC. Get a feel for how bug trackers work. If this sounds, if this is resonating with you, I have always wanted to contribute, but have not been sure where to start, what exactly the tools are that I need, this may be perfect for you. And as project maintainers, make sure that we're not turning away people who don't have that general tools background. Whenever anyone comes on IRC and pound Python and says, I want to contribute, but I don't know how, have a good story for them. Don't say, go learn how to use Git, go learn how to use Mercurial, and then come back. Have a roadmap for potential new contributors. Because a lot of this is really scary for people, remember? A lot of this great work can happen in user groups, right? This is the in-person stuff. This is the local stuff. So this is where a lot of opportunities are for using that grant money, using that sprint money, you addressing some of the concerns you have yourself in the context of friends who probably also have the same concerns. A year and a half ago, I did a survey of user group organizers because I was interested in what some of the challenges are for running Python user groups. And I got back a lot of really, really great feedback. The most common thing that people said was, it's simply overwhelming to figure out how to deal with such a broad range of backgrounds. Like, I don't know how to and don't have the time to figure out how to cater our user group to absolute beginners and professional Python programmers. That's really intimidating. This is, again, an opportunity for us all to get together on this. Think about your local user group, or the nearest local user group. What is something you wish existed? Do you wish there were an Intro to Python workshop? Do you wish there were sprints on core Python? Because we collectively have the ability to make this happen. We can get you the money. We can help you get the space. We can help you get the volunteers. But I would encourage you to think about your local community and what is possible, what you would like to see, and then go make it happen. So I have 2 requests for you this weekend. This is the beginning. This is the very beginning of PyCon Canada. 2 requests as you go through today and tomorrow and into the sprints on Monday and Tuesday. The first is, honestly think about something that you want to get better at. What is the thing that you've struggled with before? Does math freak you out? For a lot of people, like algorithmic programming is a hang-up. Do you get caught up on the sort of interface, protocol, architectural design stuff when it comes to programming? Think about something that intimidates you. Think about a skill set thing you want to develop, and then commit yourself to, this weekend, working on it. OK, so you need practice architecting solutions to big problems. OK, great. There's a talk for you. Go to Ken this talk on Python for Humans, and get inspired about what good interface design looks like, and then this weekend, commit yourself to working on a big project. Awesome. Are you intimidated by open source contribution? It looks like, from the hand raises earlier, the answer is yes for a lot of you. Awesome. Guess what? There's a talk on contributing to Python this weekend. Go to it. Decide that this is the weekend that you're going to make your first patch ever to Python core. Do it together if you want, if that's helpful, and just go do it. Monday and Tuesday, the sprint days are open. Awesome. Make it happen. So that was request number 1. Think about a thing that you want to improve about yourself. I'll do it too, I promise. And collectively, let's make it happen this weekend. And then my second request is, keeping in mind these fears, these concerns, these intimidating things that people experience in our community, think about one thing that you can do. It can be tiny. One tiny thing that you can do in your community to alleviate some of these concerns. And by your community, that can mean your local user group. That can mean your favorite IRC channel. That could be Stack Overflow. I don't care. But pick one tiny thing that you can do so that people worry less about not being smart enough, that people worry less about being yelled at for formatting a bad patch, that people feel supported when they're asking for help. Maybe the commitment is, on Pound Python, on IRC, you are going to tell people to be nice when they're not being nice. Awesome, I'll take it. That would be a phenomenal, tiny step towards supporting all of these new community members that we're getting through all of these online learning initiatives and through our user groups. So think about it. Walk away today with something for you to work on for yourself and something for you to work on for your community. And I think that if we were literally all to do that, we would have a tremendous impact on Python in general by the end of this week. So think about it. And I'm going to leave you with one quote from a workshop, an intro workshop that I teach, the Boston Python workshop. There was these are all absolute beginning programmers, have never programmed before. And nothing makes me happier than hearing, programming was no big deal. Programming was not intimidating. I was awesome at it this weekend. I am hooked. I'm going to continue learning Python. That is what I want to hear from beginners. That's what I want to hear from intermediate programmers. I want advanced, super awesome programmers to keep that sort of positive attitude about what's possible with programming. And I hope that you'll experience this weekend here at PyCon. I hope you all learn a lot. I hope you all help each other. I hope you all attend the sprints. Thank you to all of the organizers. And I think that we are set to go forth with more awesome talks at PyCon Canada.
So we're done early, which is absolutely unheard of. I know Python's a very expressive programming language, and apparently we have very expressive speakers as well. We're about 15 minutes ahead of schedule. So Jessica, if you'd like to take a few questions, actually, we could probably do that at this time. Is this thing rigged for questions? So does anybody want to come up and ask Jessica a question about her talk? This is Daniel Lindsley. Welcome, Daniel.
So it's somewhat related to your talk. You said you manage the Boston Python users group.
Yeah.
What's some of the complexities of dealing with that size of a user group, and what can people with smaller groups learn from that?
Totally. Okay, so the question is, okay, Boston Python user group is huge. Maybe what can other user groups learn, and in particular, smaller user groups? So we are huge, 2,500 people. Our average event size is like 100 to 120. And the big thing is space, which is not that interesting, but it's a reality. Space and feeding 120 people is actually really expensive. But what I will say is, we didn't start out that large. A year and a half ago, we were 600 people. So think about that level of growth over the last year and a half, 600 to 2,500 people. And a big reason for all of this growth was, number one, that we were running all of these intro workshops. And these were intro workshops focusing on women. But the secret of running diversity outreach events is that they are beneficial for the entire community. We started running these intro workshops for women, and it made us really think about how to effectively teach and nurture beginners. And we were able to take advantage of that learning throughout the rest of the user group. So intro events are awesome, and they're awesome for getting new membership. The second thing we did is we started running monthly unstructured project nights. So these are places where you come, eat free pizza, hang out, and work on whatever you want. And this is a really, really valuable place for, in particular, beginning and intermediate programmers to get experience, get confidence, work with other people, work on some of these skill set things that we're talking about in a supportive environment. So intro workshops, project nights, those are like the golden ticket to growing your user group.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, so I'm Anthony Skopats, and this exercise that you've done with the big board and everything, it's a really nice heuristic, and it sort of confirms, I think, a lot of what, I don't know, we've experienced or I've experienced in teaching workshops. But I'm wondering have you done this in a more consistent way and gathered sort of aggregated information over the series of several workshops and what people were missing? And if so, how can I get my hands on that data?
Sure. So to be clear, the whiteboard exercise was from when I was visiting Hacker School for a week. Okay. So if we're interested in this experiment, we should all go talk to Hacker School and get them to keep doing this experiment as they go through their batches. We do gather a lot of data at the Boston Python workshop about how the learning is going, how they want to use and practice Python. And that similarly addresses a lot of those questions address concerns that beginners have, as well as perhaps women specifically learning programming. Sure. So I would be happy to talk with you about those details if you're interested.
Greg Wilson, so you've told us how to do this right. What are the big mistakes? If you could go back, what are the things that we should really avoid doing? What goes wrong?
What goes wrong in programming communities?
In growing a user group like this and running these workshops, what are the terrible warnings? Because I always care more about those than the good ideas.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, okay, so I have a couple of answers to this. Number one is, if you haven't done it before, it's really hard to understand what it's like to be a beginner if you haven't been one in a long time. And when I say beginner, let me give you some examples. Okay, Boston Python workshop, people with no prior programming experience. Things that we need to teach as part of this include installing software, having a reasonable text editor for editing code. You don't have that on Windows by default. Starting Python, basic command line navigation skills. These are things that are taken for granted for people who have programmed before or who have sort of high general technical literacy. And you don't, you have to be careful about that if you are committed to helping beginners in your user group. So like the level of beginner people whichever of over or underestimate in this context, yeah. So beginners. And then the second thing is it's actually really hard to be really patient and really nice. And you should all practice and not let people be mean and call out bad behavior. And that sounds really silly, but you all hang out in online fora probably. It's pretty easy for people to not be as nice as they think they are. So be nice, be friendly, be supportive, be open, be welcoming of diversity initiatives. These things all promote a really happy place full of learning, which is what we've become, which is great.
I have another question about teaching beginners. I think a lot of us probably learned to program 10, go to 20, print hello, that kind of stuff. Really simple, very, very basic command line things, and then we graduated to writing toy implementation of grep. And if I was going to teach somebody to program today, that would be my default tool. But I have a suspicion that the kids these days wouldn't really be motivated by grep.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. But
So, I mean, what kind of projects do you have to give to people? Do you have to say, here, write a search engine, or?
well, that's what Udacity did, right? So Udacity's class was all about that.
Which
sort
is
of the culminating
kind of
project.
advanced, it seems to me.
I would agree.
But I'm curious. How do you find the balance between the simplicity of grep and the gratification of a massive, complicated website using a modern framework and JavaScript and Python and HTML and CSS and whiz-bang stuff that takes years to learn how to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a great question for a couple of reasons. One is that people want to do stuff with Python that they may not be ready for, and you have to rein that in a little bit. For example, everyone wants to build a website in Django. And if you learned Python 2 days ago, I mean, that may be an option for you, but it may also not be, because there's all this auxiliary stuff about like how the web works. That's a part of building a website. So what we do in Boston is we've crafted really tiny bite-sized projects that we've very, very carefully honed and like peeled away the layers from repeatedly over the last year and a half, so that attendees have this wow moment without actually writing a lot of code that's very hard. So the 3 projects that we use, one is implementing little parts of a Twitter client. And you write like the one line that finishes the API call, and then you get the benefit of like being able to stalk your friends on Twitter with this little script that we've written, and that's really appealing to new programmers. The second project we have is this color wall project, where it's like a grid of pixels, and you program graphical effects for it, which is very appealing to people who are sort of visually inclined. And then our third project is a wordplay project, where you sort of find words with weird properties, and you learn how to cheat at words with friends. But again, the actual code that these people are writing, it's like you write the for loop. And they do that, and then it works, and it feels awesome, and they get that wow moment without actually having a lot of really intimidating code. We've also written a bunch of material for an intermediate Python workshop that has sort of slightly larger projects to practice programming skills. If this stuff sounds interesting to you, there is that group organizers mailing list at python.org where people talk about this stuff, and all of our material for all of this stuff, the beginner and intermediate workshops, are all online and Creative Commons licensed. So if that sounds fun, I would be happy to get in touch with you. That was a long answer. So.
Hi. I was wondering, when you get more beginners, as you did in Boston, and then how did you fold them into the user group? In Chicago, our user group usually has intermediate to advanced presentations every month, so I'm afraid they would leave beginners behind.
Yes, by force of will. No, what we do is we have these project nights every month. So, those are appropriate for people of all programming experience backgrounds. So at the very least, there's an event every month that a beginner can go to. And then we make a point of running events that cater to beginners. We just had an Intro to Django workshop. I mean, the organizers, it's up to you. It's up to you to find the balance between the experience levels that you're catering to.
This is going to have to be our last question, so if you want to ask Jessica a few things after the talk, we're going to have a break, and you can stalk her then.
Okay, so you've been talking a lot about teaching programming to beginners. How do you convince them that it is actually possible to learn programming? Because most of them, I find, are afraid or even unaware that you can program computers. How do you do that?
That's a good question. Well, so a lot of it is again by this willingness to start at the very beginning, where we install Python together, and we install a text editor together. And there's literally no prerequisite material implied when we run these things. So I think if you commit to running it, to starting at the very beginning, people become very willing to experiment. I mean, people have to want to learn Python before they'll come to one of these workshops. So we're like one step after what you're talking about. I think a lot of people see the value, though. In particular, when we run these events, we get a ton of folks who want to change careers in programming, like they've lost their jobs or the economy's crappy, and like they know that their programmer friends are making lots of good money, and that seems like a pretty legitimate weekend investment to make. I think in general, people understand the value of programming, even if they might not personally want to pursue it.